Greetings! This afternoon you're getting a double llama welcome to Old Ways Rising Farm. We are inside the sheep pasture and I wanted to do a little quick walkthrough and talk about how we're establishing our first pastures. So this is the very beginning of our third growing season on the farm, so you're seeing things here at a very early stage of development. We hope to have a large herd of sheep, a couple goats in there, and some large fowl, some either geese or turkeys or both in this pasture system. But at the moment, we just have a couple little helpers to help eat down the brush and get us started along that path. This is a very, like I mentioned a moment ago, a very young farm. So in the previous video, I talked about pasture siting and how we chose this pasture for ease of access to the water points, which is something we especially have to think about as an off-grid farm that is in a winter cold climate. If you look at the water here, you could see the water, I have it insulated on two sides. Okay, the way we keep this open in the winter is by coming out twice a day, smashing the ice out, and dumping a bucket of hot water in, 5 gallons of hot water in it. And that keeps it open enough that they can access it pretty much all day. It'll freeze up by the next morning, but it's certainly open enough that they're never short on water. But this requires that we're close to the water source. So that was the number one, in our context, that was the number one criteria for choosing where to put our pasture, close to the water source. Then from there, the next question was, how does it fit with everything else? And how do we put things together in a rational geometry? So if you saw the previous video, you got a more thorough walkthrough on all the pastures and where they're sitting. But what I'm looking at here on the other side of Ruby the llama, Ruby's an awful cute llama. She could use a thumbs up, don't you think? And on the other side of Ruby the llama, that's the main chicken pasture. That was also chosen so that we could have it, so that we could preserve a small orchard of pear trees. We wanted to wrap the pear trees in the orchard, maximize sunny ground access for the vegetable gardens, and again, keep the chickens close to the house. So we located the water source for the sheep. We located where that chicken coop had to be, and then we just made the garden spaces and the pastures mesh. So the downside to this is that the area that was already lawn and nice grass ended up going to the chickens instead of to the sheep. But that was just sort of an inherent part of the geometries that we had to work with. The area I'm walking in now, where these lovely animals are, this was grass. And if you can see where that robin is right out there, this strip here was grass. But if you look, 1, 2 fence posts down, you can kind of see a line right through there, where my finger's pointing. From there up was grass. From there down was all just hardscrabble, right? It was some grass in there, but you can see there's a bunch of twiggy stuff sticking up. There were a bunch of young little shrubs. There was a bunch of goldenrod. So they did a really good job of wiping that out in the very first year we were here. And that was the first step in converting this from a little bit of grass and a forest to a silvopasture. Now, a silvopasture is a deliberate planned combination of timber species and grassland mixed together. And they'll end up being something of a savanna type condition. Okay, so the first thing was we wanted to get all of this hardscrabble into grass, and the sheep have accomplished that. That was really no work on our part. The next stage is working through all of this brushy area and getting it converted to grass here along the edges. So I'm kind of panning the camera back and forth around this space, and you can see it's covered with hay. Well, that hay is the waste hay that sheep are messy eaters. You can see there's our hay manger and a big pile of hay with a divot in it, because I was doing some of this morning. They waste a lot, and that's the pile that just built up and got frozen in over the winter. Okay, so that is being scooped up and placed in these areas that were brushy enough the grass had not been growing previously. Where I am here, this is all material that I put down in the fall, and you can see we've got some nice patches of grass starting to come up here already. That's a nice one. Over here, you can see there's a lot of grass coming in down there. So this is a really wonderful way to use up that waste material, what would otherwise just be waste. So this whole strip is turning into grass that way. I did direct sow a little bit of seed in there, but sowing the waste hay has proven more successful than sowing seed, actually. And I'm continuing this across as I get the waste hay. You can see this patch looks nice and fresh. This is what I was doing this morning. And I will continue this on across, but you can see what it looked like before applying the hay. This was all brush. Now, a lot of this was too tall for the sheep to eat down. Okay, I'll show you what it looked like here in a minute when we walk around the other side of this pasture. But yeah, a lot of this was too tall for the sheep to eat down. So I came in and did a chop and drop right in front of them, and boy, do they love those tree leaves. Tree leaves are very high in protein. Okay? So it's really good fodder for the sheep, especially these sheep. These are Navajo-churro, which is, for lack of a better description, a very goat-like sheep, right? They're very, very tough, hardy animals, which is why we chose them. The other reason we chose them is because our property is steep. If I pan this way, you can see we're going down a hill and into what was a very mismanaged forest. Now, there absolutely are good loggers, but whoever logged this last time was a moron, okay? You can see where I've done a lot of cutting here for firewood. I did this in the fall and then discovered that my tractor didn't have enough traction to haul it all up, so I'm still figuring out how to get this all out of here, but that is a problem that we will solve in due time. But if you look at the bases of these trees, right here and right there, that is a very characteristic type of damage that you get when a logger is utterly careless and scrapes logs against the bark of living trees and strips out the bark. Okay, so those trees are not going to survive. They will be cut down. They'll be cut down this spring or summer, and they will be more chop and drop tree hay. And then once the sheep have a chance to eat all the leaves off, I will come back and cut them up for firewood. So this will go to use. But still, it's unfortunate that it happened that way. But the fact that this is the case in this section is part of why we took the pasture down in this direction, because I knew that these were going to have to come out, so it would be an easy area to convert to a silvopasture paddock. You can see what ends up happening there. This one had the same damage. You see it rotted out on one side and then broke over, right? So that's a hung up leaning tree that I've got to deal with. Those are a miserable thing to have to deal with. You can see what's up here, all those down trees are ones that didn't make it even this long, right? So like I said, there are good loggers, but whoever logged this last was a moron, okay? This one's got a real obvious scar on it right there too, so that one will have to come out. Now, moving back in, like I said, silvopasture is deliberate. Silvopasture is not just an accidental savanna. It is a deliberate, planned combination of grassland and woody species. So this guy right there is an oak tree. Okay, this guy right there is an oak tree. There's a bunch of oak trees right up there. I'm deliberately leaving the oak trees. Okay, I'm leaving a few others for diversity. This right there, that's a clump of oak trees. Okay, and our eventual plan is to add geese and turkey into this pastoral system. The sheep do not eat the acorns, which is interesting. They just leave them be. But waterfowl and turkeys relish them. So those are what will fatten our geese and turkeys when we get them in future years. Okay. So the oaks are being favored. Even the ones that are injured, I will leave until I absolutely have to cut them out. Okay. And they're being strongly favored here in this planting. This area, every tree that you see cut down in here was cut because it was, had the bark stripped off and was rotting in place. Okay, you can see that on this log right there. Right, this is the rotten patch. You can see it was most of the way through, and that would have broken fairly soon. So all of these were trees that did not have a future. There are also a few in here that were sick, and we'll talk about disease and how that relates to timber stand management in future videos. Okay, but this whole corner is now cleared out, and when I'm done putting the hay up top there, future hay will come down in a wheelbarrow to this patch. I also, in the fall, started sowing in here some, just broadcast scattering, some prairie savanna grasses. Okay, so they'll be more shade tolerant, and they can start establishing earlier while this all is getting set up. So you can see there's still some patches where I need to do some more chop and drop. Some more trees that need cut down. This is a good example. This one was really bad. I'll wander over this way. You can see this whole side. This is alive. Let me back up a bit. That's alive. That's alive. But 2/3 of the trunk totally rotten out. Okay. When you're cutting firewood, you always want to cut the junk and leave the good. Right? If anybody ever tries to sell you a, air quotes, selective cut or diameter limit cut, where they're saying, we'll take the big nice ones and we'll leave these little young ones to grow, kick them off of your property, they're jerks, they're the bad loggers, they're not giving you the straight scoop. You want to cut the garbage stuff. You want to cut the low quality, the injured, and leave the good to grow, to shed seed, so that you have good quality trees in the next generation, right? You cut from the bottom, you don't cut from the top. And even though this is not going to be managed primarily as a timber stand, that rule still holds. We are cutting out the low quality and saving the better quality. These oaks do have some value to them, but they are going to stay both for seed source and for food for the animals, and to provide some patches of shade. Okay, so we're walking along to the edge of the pasture. And you'll get to see here in a minute what this looked like before starting to do all of this work. There's also a lot of junk in here that had just been tossed in the woods, and gradually pulling that out. Okay. And this brushy patch right ahead, this is what it all looked like before me cutting and dropping and the sheep eating down everything that they can reach, right? So that's the before, and this is the after. Okay. down through there. As we move forward, this is a very difficult section to get a good sward of grass growing on, because it's going to be, about half shade, half sun when I'm done with it. But it's also a north slope, and this is, as you can see, we're a fairly cold hill farm here. But this is going to be the next pasture. It's going to go out across the hill this way. Again, there's large chunks of damaged and destroyed trees in here that will come down to make, patches of meadow that can grow grass for the sheep. But then this will connect up to the other end of the hill over there is west facing, and that will be our primary pasture for really feeding the animals. Okay. And that will get from where we are, where we have access to the water point, out to the other side of the property where we have access to lots of sunlight and can grow really nice grass. But still, even out there, we will have a mixture of some wooded and some grassland. There's a couple patches there. You can see some of these hemlocks in there, where I'm going to thicken the canopy with evergreens for protection. And that'll also be for the turkeys and geese to have area to shelter in there while they're out here in the pasture. So it's going to be a mixture of all of those attributes. This pasture is currently about 0.8 acre or so. They're coming down to see what I'm up to. Okay. You can see it is relatively steep, which is why we have small-bodied animals. Camelids are very gentle on the ground because of how their feet splay out. They cause very little erosion relative to their body size, and the Navajo-churro sheep are a small-bodied sheep. So they're gentle on the ground, and that was an important criteria. Here, there's another tree that's badly damaged and will come out eventually. The last thing I want to mention is the fencing. So the fencing is a 6-inch board at the bottom, 3 foot of fence, and then a 6-inch at the top for a total of 4 foot of fence. And this is very solid welded wire fence. You do not want to go cheap on fence. If you do, you will regret the entire time that you are running animals on that property. Okay? Especially perimeter fence. Now, at some point in the future, with only one paddock, we can't yet do rotational grazing. We will eventually be doing rotational grazing once we have multiple paddocks. But while we only have one, every fence is perimeter fence. If I wanted to come and divide this paddock in two, once all of these damaged trees are down and we have nice grass growing in here, if I wanted to divide this paddock in two, that would not have to be the same level of durability. Because if they got up from one, they would still be in a fence, and the predators would still be kept out. But just about 200 meters below me here is an old logging road that is a coyote superhighway, right? So it's not just about fence that small-bodied sheep will respect. It's about fence that will keep the coyotes out of the sheep. And that's also the primary job of those lovely llamas up there. Their job is to convince any coyotes that would want to come close that there's easier food elsewhere, and they do a good job of that. I have seen coyote tracks in the snow that came and walked the entire perimeter of the fence and never came in. So they're doing their job. We do have black bear, but they're not real aggressive toward the sheep. At least the eastern black bear is not. I know that the western black bear is a different story altogether. But the eastern black bear isn't that aggressive of a predator. So the coyotes are really the largest predator that we have to deal with here. We don't have to deal with mountain lion, and we don't have to deal with wolves. So having those two llamas in with all of our lovely lady sheep is plenty to keep the coyotes out and chasing wild food instead of the domestics. So That's our pasture journey at this point. I hope you found it interesting and useful, and I hope that you will join us next time here at Old Ways Rising Farm. So long for now.